Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Jamie Gass, the Director of Pioneer Education. Welcome to our webinar for Dr. Fred Savoie's new book, The History of Vocational Education in Massachusetts, a Model for the Nation. Here's a copy of the book right here. It's weighty and significant and substantive. Fred is an outstanding vocational educator, leader, and now author. For nearly 2 decades, Fred and David Ferreira have been indispensable as Pioneer has produced a book, many research papers, toolkits, op-eds, events, and webinars on vocational technical schooling in the Bay State. In the preface to his excellent detailed book, which is over 550 pages and has nearly 1,400 endnotes, Fred describes the basic questions that prompted him to research and write this volume. Why was Massachusetts the first state to support vocational education system? Why is the Massachusetts vocational education system significantly different from other states? How has Massachusetts been able to sustain the excellence of its vocational education system? I first met and got to know Fred over 20 years ago when we both worked for the Massachusetts Office of Educational Quality and Accountability. This is a bit like saying you've met somebody at the dentist's office. The EQA's mission was important, though, and an unpopular one. Nobody likes to be held accountable, and school districts are no exception. As the senior writer and editor of the 130-page school district reports the EQA produced each week, I got to see and hear it all, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Those EQA reports included 30 pages of data of every kind, from student MCAS performance to district finances, as well as another 100 pages of detailed standards and indicators drawn from on-site district reviews conducted by a team of 10 seasoned educators. The EQA was modeled on the British school inspection system first established in the mid-19th century and still in use today. Well, you can imagine that Massachusetts school districts enjoyed getting those EQA reports about as much as they'd enjoy drinking a bucket of cod liver oil. But the Voc-Tech schools were different in key ways. First, they had Fred. He's one of the deans of the Voc-Tech community and was also the lead Voc-Tech examiner for EQA. As many know, Fred's not only a solid educator, thoughtful mentor, and a gentleman, but he also has an encyclopedic knowledge and incalculable judicious insights about Voc-Tech education. It's an old school term. Fred has wisdom. In addition, he cares about the Voc-Tech schools the way a father or a grandfather cares about his children and grandchildren. He worked carefully on the Voc-Tech reviews and closely with me on the EQA's Voc-Tech reports. But then he did something nobody else really did. He took the EQA reports to the Voc-Tech schools themselves and then worked carefully to help school leaders understand the findings and implement the recommendations and reforms. Voc-Tech gains followed. The second thing the Voc-Techs had going for them was their practical, laser-like sense of mission and commitment to their student-centered school culture. This was a key to the remarkable results the schools have delivered over the last 20 to 25 years. Writing those EQA reports and producing research papers at Pioneer, which document and chronicle the story of Massachusetts Voc-Techs, has been a pleasure. This is because the Voc-Techs results are so impressive, and the MAVA folks have a genuine sense of professionalism, community, and seriousness about what they do on behalf of their students. Pioneer's own recent book on Voc-Tech schools shows that under the 1993 reforms, the Voc-Techs have used occupational education grounded in quality academic content, accountability, and partnerships with business to change kids' lives for the better. What Fred's careful research and well-written book tell us is that the Massachusetts Voc-Tech model was more than 100 years in the making. Without a doubt, the Voc-Tech schools used the tools of the Commonwealth's 93 Education Reform Act to drive remarkable achievements. But these reforms were built upon a century of far-sighted Voc-Tech policymaking at the state, local, and school levels. We learned from Fred's well-documented historical research that the Massachusetts Voc-Tech model is unique. He maps out several historical phases of Voc-Tech's development and reform, which very often coincide with the educational, industrial, and economic trajectory of Massachusetts across the 20th and early 21st centuries. To read through Fred's book is to explore one of the most successful school models in the highest performing state in the Union. The Commonwealth's Voc-Tech schools unmistakably serve a very practical purpose of supplying our state with the human capital and the workforce it needs to compete in the global economy. Fred's work reminds us who we are as a state, what we'd like to become, and how we're likely going to succeed as a democracy and an economy. In my view, it is essential that we learn from the past about what actually works as we celebrate these Voc-Tech schools' ongoing achievements. Because, as Stanford's Pulitzer-winning historian David Kennedy once said, history is the only real data we have. So that we can better understand and continue to improve the Voc-Tech's performance, education policymakers need to learn from the book's research and data on this topic. With his book, Fred uses the past to help show us the way forward. This afternoon, we have with us Dr. Wilfrid Savoie, a career Voc-Tech leader and author of The History of Vocational Education in Massachusetts, a Model for the Nation. David Ferreira, Communications Coordinator for MAVA. Jim Brosnan, Superintendent, McCann Technical School. Jill Rossetti, Superintendent-Director, Blue Hills Regional Voc-Tech School. Eric Duda, Superintendent, Pathfinder Regional Voc-Tech. We're so pleased to begin with Dr. Wilfrid Savoie.
Hey, Jamie, thank you very much for that introduction. I'd like to first thank the Pioneer Institute and Jamie Gass, as well as the Mass Association of Vocational Administrators and David Ferreira for providing me with the opportunity to discuss some of the key findings from my book. And the focus will be on the fundamental principles that were developed as vocational education came about. The establishment and growth of the first generation of vocational schools, referred to as industrial schools, is a result of many forces and events that were impacted by people, purpose, principles, and places. Massachusetts was becoming a manufacturing powerhouse in the mid-19th century. They were leading the world in textiles, leading the world in shoe and boot manufacturing, and many other industries as well. Manufacturers, labor unions, social reformers, and educators all recognized at that time in the mid-1800s that education needed to be more practical. The education of the time was not serving the youth, and so this entire group really were looking for some changes. Manufacturers and labor unions were looking to provide skill training. Reformers were looking for social change in the workforce as well as in society. And educators were generally looking for tool knowledge. They had been general educators had instituted manual training, which provided general tool knowledge, and they were happy with that right now and wanted to continue that. Massachusetts industrial leaders wanted a skilled workforce because they knew that in order to be competitive in the world market, they needed that workforce. And so in 1905, just prior to that, Governor William Douglas, who was the governor of Massachusetts in 1905, January 1905, January 1906. In those years, governors only had a one-year term. And William Douglas was running for governor. He was the world's leading manufacturer of shoes. He owned the Douglas Shoe Company in Brockton, Massachusetts. And part of his platform was to move in the direction of industrial education for Massachusetts. He did win the election. And as soon as that happened, he introduced a resolution to the legislature to establish a commission to investigate industrial education. At that testimony for that resolution was a man named Milton Higgins. Milton Higgins is famous in the Worcester area, but is also a national and state and local leader in industrial education. He taught at the Worcester County Free Industrial Science School, which became WPI, for 27 years. And one of the things that he introduced was using a commercial shop in order to train and mechanical engineers. So they would have to apply the theory to an actual project. And that effort, by the way, still continues today. Milton Higgins went on to be a very successful industrial giant, really, in the Worcester area. The report of the commission that was established as a result of that resolution really crystallized the the industrial educational movement in Massachusetts and throughout the country. As a matter of fact, they had to reprint the report from that commission in order to get enough copies around the country. Other states were using it. Now, the first wave of foundational principles came out of that industrial Douglas Commission, I should say, the Douglas Commission findings and recommendations. One of the things that came out of that commission was that it would be necessary for both technical knowledge and skills to be taught, not only just manual skills, but both of those, both the knowledge and the skills. They also recommended that the industrial schools be distinctively separate from the public schools, that they had their own board of trustees. There was a concern that if industrial education became part of the public education system, it would become too book learning and more on the manual training aspect. The commission also recommended that there be a state and local financial partnership. And initially, there was a 50-50 split or thereabouts between the local community who established an industrial school and the state. That partnership, by the way, lasted until about 1978. Also, out of that Douglas Commission, the industrial schools that would be established would deal with agriculture, which was a major field of endeavor, domestic arts, which would be basically household skills that primarily young women and girls would be needing, and then mechanical arts or mechanical skills. So those would be the primary focus of the industrial schools. When it came to admissions, and they looked at the criteria, this was the Douglas Commission, they first said that the people coming into the industrial schools would be at least 14 years of age. And that was basically to be in line with the mandatory educational age of the time. Even though it was 14, there were young people who were leaving school and had only received by the age of 14 a 6th grade or 7th grade education. So that was part of the reformers' effort to bring about industrial education. The school approval factors were recommended to look at the location of the school, the courses of study that would be given, and then the instructional methodology. Those three factors are in the current law today, along with several other factors. And the establishment of the industrial schools could either be done by a municipality, a single municipality, or a union of municipalities. Now, here's the beginning of the regional concept. Although it didn't really come about for some years, the Douglas Commission was already thinking about the practicality of more than one industry getting together, more than one municipality getting together to create an industrial school. And their final recommendation out of the Douglas Commission was to establish a permanent commission which would oversee the establishment of the regional schools. So by the time that the Douglas Commission report came out, William Douglas had gone back to Brockton and continued his shoe operation. Governor Curtis Giles became the governor. He established a commission of what was considered a permanent industrial commission. He appointed Professor Paul Hannes of Harvard College. Paul Hannes was the originator of the educational department at Harvard. And this was in 1906, the commission began. So the Curtis Commission, Permanent Commission, began to establish schools separate but parallel to the public schools, meaning that they wanted to be separated, no influence, undue influence from the public schools, but they had to be cooperative, work together, because obviously the students coming into the industrial schools were coming from the public schools. So there had to be a relationship that existed. There were several models that were looked at and recommended by the Curtis Commission. Trades taught in schools, or trades taught in industry, in an actual industrial application. They were trying both aspects. In the agricultural studies, the programs could take place in a separate school, such as initially a Smith Vocational School, agricultural school, or the agricultural programs could be part of a comprehensive high school where an agricultural department would be established. This is really the first move to a comprehensive picture. Also, there was a recommendation that students who lived in a community that did not have an industrial school had the legal right to attend an industrial school in another city, and that the state would be obligated and the community would be obligated to pay a portion of that, subject to the acceptance of that student in the school, subject to available space. So that non-resident criteria is still with us today. And then the admissions, looking at the admissions policies, they required that evidence of ability to profit be ascertained by the industrial school. Now that was left up to the industrial school. They did it in many different ways, from interviews to parental agreements, but there had to be evidence by the industrial school to know that the student coming into the school would benefit. And what that really boils down to is that the student would be able to obtain employment following their education. The 14-year-old requirement was also maintained, and they also added being physically fit, that some of the trade areas required physical strength, and so they had to be a measure of physical ability. In 1909, after 3 years of in existence, the Curtis Commission was getting a lot of heat around the state with regards to the amount of money they were spending. I think their budget in their third year was $15,000. But Massachusetts at that time was a very conservative state, did not want to spend money for an additional commission. So legislation was passed where the Commission on Industrial Education and the Board of Education would be merged and reconstituted as a new Board of Education. And one of the things that was required was that the chairman of the Commission on Industrial Education, Paul Hannes, would become a member of the Board of Education. The new Board of Education was also really, I would say, packed with many pro-industrial educators. So the fact that these two boards were combined still put industrial education in a very strong position. The first thing that the newly constituted Board of Education did was to appoint the first Commissioner of Education. Up until that time, there was only a Board of Education and the Secretary of Education, a few employees. That was it. So they appointed unanimously Dr. David Snedden as the first Commissioner of Education. Dr. Snedden was from Columbia University. He had an extensive background as a superintendent, as a principal, as an educator, principally in California. And he was very pro industrial education. He was one of the first people to begin to use the term vocational education or vocational schools. He really provided the social justification, the educational philosophy, and the pedagogy for vocational education. So he was really a qualified educator and advocated for vocational education. He defined the chief aim of vocational education as an education or training to fit an individual for a productive role or job. Now that has remained in as a chief aim of vocational education for the life of its existence. Some of the other terms used as a student can benefit, can obtain gainful employment, profitable employment, wage earning employment, but that primary aim has always existed and continues to exist. Other factors and recommendations that came out and were implemented from Dr. Snedden was that the practical training would take place for part of a day, part of a week, or part of a year, or part of a month. That was what they were looking for. That training for women and girls would have a dual purpose. That is, train for household. Eventually, virtually all women became housewives, and so they needed to be trained in the skills of housewomen, or they could work in a household for other people. And there was also training for industry. Now, the primary industry for women at that time was machine sewing, general sewing, and hat making was a major industry for women in those days. Also, as part of Dr. Snedden's efforts, agricultural education was established both as separate schools and in high schools as part of a comprehensive school. Now, the separate schools would have been the three agricultural schools that were established in and around 1912 to 1915. They were in Essex County, Bristol County, and Norfolk County, and also the agricultural school in Smith. Of the schools, it made sense to have agricultural departments within a high school, and that was really the beginning of comprehensive settings. There also was required, as part of Dr. Snedden's efforts, was advisory committees were required for each school, each department. At that time, as part of the comprehensive approach, when a vocational school became part of a high school, the school committee would be the overseer of the vocational program, and they were required to meet with an advisory committee from industry to ensure that their programs remain connected with industry and with the trade areas. They also required, part of Snedden's efforts, was that the state supervisors that he began to hire also had to have expertise in the trade areas. Now that no longer exists, but some of my colleagues on the board, on the response board, may remember the time where we had state supervisors with expertise in the trade areas. Other areas that Snedden introduced was that vocational teachers would come from industry first and then take a short-term course in how to teach. This was quite a radical movement at the time, and this came as a result of Snedden's recommendations. He also felt that all of the laws that had been written, all of the regulations that had been written, had to be codified, I should say. And so it led to a more familiarity with what was required at the time. And eventually those laws became Chapter 74 of the Mass General Laws as we know today, and the regulations that we now see in the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. The admissions was again looked at, their admissions requirements, and continued to be based on the intentions to follow the vocational training. So this was another way to look at people, young people coming into vocational education, that they would be benefiting from it, and they would be had the intention to follow in the trade area from which they were receiving training. And that has been a constant. In the end, Dr. Snedden was in Massachusetts until 1916. He vigorously promoted the notion of what he called social efficiency or social competency. And what that meant was that society was required to educate youth in skills, knowledge, and attitudes that resulted in the occupational success of each individual. So he really galvanized the purpose, the intent of vocational education in Massachusetts, and supported the growth of vocational education, and where it really became, as a result of his efforts, became a permanent field within the public education. The second generation, which we can consider the second generation, would be the regional vocational schools. And it came about because of several forces and several events. One of them was the fact that the baby boomers were reaching high school age, 1960 or thereabouts. And so therefore educators were concerned about what are we going to do with all this burgeoning high school population. Also happening at that time was the regional concept that was growing. The Massachusetts created a regional law for schools, public schools in 1948. And many schools began looking at that regional concept in the mid-50s. There was also something called Sputnik that went up, the Russian Sputnik, and caused quite a bit of concern in the technical areas. And so the United States government wanted to make sure that math and science was taught and technology was taught in the public schools. So all of these factors were coming together at a time around the late 50s. And so that people began to look at the concept of regional schools and how to better serve, better create vocational schools, and looking at a unique statewide model. There were communities in both ends of the state looking at this model. In northern Berkshire around 1955, schools, the school departments in North Adams and in neighboring communities began to look at the concept for a vocational school district, which it did end up creating the first regional vocational school district. Also, in the South Shore of the state, in Hanover, and around the late 50s, 1958, they were looking at the possibility of creating a regional vocational school because there were people that were familiar with that process, the regional process, and they ended up creating the second regional vocational regional school district in South Shore. So the gold standards of those schools, of the second generation regional schools, are really a reflection of the foundational principles that we talked about earlier in the first generation of industrial schools. And we can go through them. The self-contained individual programs. The regional schools exemplified that founding principle, that they have their separate industrial, vocational programs, rigorous academics, and student activities, all contained in one location. And the process for the purpose of that training is still remains to be training for employment. So you look at the unique model that we have in the beginning in 1906. That was a model for the country. Many copied that model. Our later second generational model, the regional schools, which began in the early 1960s for a school opening in 1962. That is also a model, but other states have chose not to replicate that model, although we are advocating, and agencies such as the Pioneer Institute advocate for that purpose. In closing, I would say that the establishment of vocational education in Massachusetts is really a remarkable story of persistence and success. The founding principles that we have talked about have become many of the policies that sustain and have sustained the test of time for vocational education. We know that education is trendy. It does move with different latest trends, but vocational education has been the most significant change in education since its beginning and has remained that way. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Fred, for all of your work and your many years that you've worked in vocational education, and certainly the book that you authored is the historical past of where we're finally coming today. And we've taken those basic principles, I think, and carried them certainly to a new level, and to further explore where we are today and where we might be in the future. It's certainly my pleasure to introduce 4 of the regional Voc-Tech superintendents who will be joining us on the panel, and we'll introduce each of them as we ask them a question, and we'll go on through a series of questions. I'd also like to recognize Jamie Gass and Jim Sturgis for their incredible belief in what we do and their support and the partnership we've had together from 2007 till today. And in addition, MAVA, the state association, will be recognizing on August the 7th, Jim and Jamie, and hopefully others who can make the event at Devon's, at the Devon's Commons Center at 7 p.m. on August the 7th. So we look forward to the opportunity for our entire organization to recognize them as well. So I'd like to begin with someone who has as much historical perspective, I guess you would say, as I do. Been around a while, and I noticed North Adams was mentioned, and McCann Tech in particular in Fred's remarks, and rightly so. And as I always like to do is to recognize the fact that, and Jamie stole my thunder a little bit, that he is a veteran, and a veteran of Iraq freedom. So thank you for your service, Jim.
Pleasure.
Jim,
it's always been a pleasure and honor to serve.
Thank you, Jim. Here's Jim's first question. As Fred's book notes, your school was the first regional Voc-Tech school district in Massachusetts, established in 58-59. Under ed reform, the data is clear that the regional Voc-Tech model and why it is such an effective reform movement. If you could comment on that, I'd really appreciate it, Jim.
Certainly would. I'd follow up. First of all, thank you to Fred from all of us for the masterful work in terms of publishing that book. There we go. But I think if you go back to the history of what happened, part of the impetus of the regional vocational system and the methodology that he mentioned the National Defense Education Act of 1958 and the Sputnik and the into technology really pushed the advent of vocational schools. So both here in the western part in North Adams area, and again, South Shore, with schools and communities coming together and saying, how can we do this? Part of it is that the regional, when you looked at a vocational school, the mission of every one of our schools was then, is today, train the workforce. And that's a little bit of a mission change from other schools. And to that end, our faculty was coming from industry and business. Our cost of materials and other equipment to be able to run those programs, when we added those together, it became an expensive model. Individual cities would be focused on large-scale industry. If you're in the rural areas, both of us were in the rural areas initially, you needed to combine efforts. So it was the residents of those communities wanting to make sure that their students had an access to that quality vocational and that quality technical training that was the impetus for communities to get together. In our case, it was 7 initially. We've grown to 9, and many of our colleagues could be 16 or 18 or 12 throughout the state as the history unraveled and unrolled, moved forward with additional school districts coming on. The model is that the balance of those students and communities together work as one. They've created this separate entity, and I think if we go back to the 1993 ed reform, we had a crossroads to emphasize only vocational and decrease academic. The issue that we came up, the law is the law, but the academic that was also part of that 1958 National Defense Education Act, and was later the Higher Education Act of 1965, dictated that vocational and technical competency should be accompanied by academic competencies in mathematics, in English, in science, and in history and citizenship. And so using that, what we have done is we've banded together, utilize the fact that 2/3 roughly of our faculty come from industry and business. They know the standards. And to that end, they were able to combine their efforts, come up with a new model of expectations for students. Long-winded, quick summary. Vocational education is inexpensive. It needed communities to combine together to make sure that they could put in the right amount of support to create the quality of the program.
Thank you, Jim. And you're spot on in terms of how it was the most economical way to meet the needs of so many students, and we continue that. The next question is for Jill Rossetti. Jill, as you already know, is the superintendent at Blue Hills Regional Tech. If that sounds familiar, her predecessor many years ago was Dr. Fred Savoie. So Jill, you've had very large shoes to fill, and you've done an outstanding job. So your question, if you would, according to Fred's book, Governor William Douglas's original 1905 Industrial Education Commission established the Massachusetts Voc-Tech model. As the person who now leads Blue Hills, could you talk about Fred's legacy of leadership in the Voc-Tech community?
Of course. Thank you, Mr. Ferreira. I'm excited to delve into the remarkable legacy of Fred Savoie in the vocational technical education community and share some insights into his journey from a successful career in electronics to becoming a transformative leader in vocational technical education. Fred graduated from the electrical department of Greater New Bedford in 1961, and he marked the beginning of a journey that would significantly impact vocational technical ed. Transitioning into education after a successful career, Mr. Savoie's leadership at Blue Hills for 16 years was pivotal. He actually hired me, which probably not many of you know, and I probably wouldn't be in this seat today if I didn't get the experiences that I did working under him. He not only steered Blue Hills towards success, but he played a crucial role in shaping vocational education policies and practices. Mr. Savoie's initiatives bridged the gap between education and industry. He championed co-op programs, brought us through MCAS testing when it first came out, Tech Prep, VICA, which was now known as Skills USA. He fostered industry partnerships and pioneered our schools to career programs, which is still in existence today. And also he assisted many vocational technical schools with EQA, as Jamie mentioned earlier. His advocacy for securing grants and state funding ensured that Blue Hills programs met evolving workforce needs, adapting to technological advancements and global economic shifts. Mr. Savoie's legacy is one of innovation, advocacy, and unwavering dedication to student success in academics, vocational technical training, and character. Mr. Savoie's leadership exemplified the importance of vocational technical education in preparing students for productive careers. As someone who experienced his leadership firsthand, I witnessed how his vision and initiatives set a standard for the gold standard of vocational technical educational leaders in the Commonwealth. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jill. And I love when you use the term gold standard. Some people prefer to say platinum standard, as a matter of fact, when you compare our delivery system to others, let's just say across the United States. Which now brings us to the Superintendent-Director, Eric Duda at Pathfinder. And Eric, congratulations. Eric recently became an officer for MAVA, its secretary for the upcoming year. And he doesn't know it, but eventually he will be president one way or the other. But we'll be happy to have your leadership at that level of our organization. But when you talk about big shoes to fill, Eric replaced Dr. Jerry Paste. And maybe you can tell us how many years Jerry was superintendent at Pathfinder before you took his place?
More years than I've been alive, David. 48 consecutive years as superintendent, the person I replaced.
Absolutely incredible legacy. And Jerry's retired and down in Pennsylvania, and we all communicate with him whenever we have the opportunity, and we wish you well if you're watching today. Eric, Fred's book says that Rufus Stimson, the early 20th century leader of agricultural education in high schools, was from Palmer, Mass, where your school is located. As the secretary of MAVA, could you talk about the central role that ag education has played in our Voc-Tech system, especially in the rural parts of the state?
Yeah, I'd be happy to comment on that, David. The last name Stimson, it's interesting. The street, Stimson Street, is only a couple of miles from the school here. And I think that kind of connects perfectly into the question. If you look at where that street is and what's near it, which is not uncommon in Massachusetts, in a lot of the rural areas here, there's a river nearby, and River Street. And in this whole Pioneer Valley area in the Connecticut Valley region, we have the Connecticut River, of course, which is a massive river. And all the towns around that river have still to this day a lot of fields and open space. One of my colleagues, Rick Martin, on the call is familiar with it as well. He's in the same valley as we serve in. And you look at the names of the towns and the cities in that region: Springfield, Greenfield, Deerfield, Northfield. They almost all end in the field. And there's no surprise when you drive through there, you still see these vast open spaces. And I think if you also reflect back on what happened through, Fred's historical perspective and information he gathered, you can see that a lot of the colleges in this area were founded and built on the need for agricultural-based education, including the UMass school system and the Hampshire College, and the list goes on. When we think of rural areas and farming and agriculture, I think sometimes it might be easy just to think immediately of like planting and growing vegetables, but there's so much more than that. And when you have farming that's advancing with the Industrial Revolution like it did, we have tractors that are replacing horses, and then we have all sorts of equipment that needs maintenance, and then we have production levels that need to be increased as populations increased. And I think the very forward-thinking individuals that looked at the need for educating our population, as Fred was outlining in the beginning, as he was discussing his book, was spot on. We had to figure out a way, they had to figure out a way to make sure we were training our young people and our citizens through vocational education. And if you fast forward to where we are now with agricultural education, I feel like that's the base of everything we stand for, because if you look at the regional Voc-Tech schools that we have, the 26, not I shouldn't say not counting the agricultural, the 26 regional Voc-Techs, and then of course adding the agricultural schools, that's really the foundation of what began. And if you look at all the industries that have grown from that, whether it's ag mechanics or any kind of mechanical or plumbing, or the need for carpentry, and then even more advanced careers, programming and web development and IT. A tractor now isn't like it was 100 years ago, and it might be GPS controlled and have to do it on a larger scale. And a business that's built or an industry that's run needs high-tech fields as well. So it's no surprise that we look at the technical training we're providing and the vocational training, it's expanded with the times, which is wonderful. I think if we, to go to the root of your question, look at the agricultural piece of how that impacted this area, I think we can say that kind of established the foundation of what we all work with now in vocational education.
Well said, Eric, as always. Speaking of agriculture and being out on the Mohawk Trail is Rick Martin. Rick is the superintendent at Franklin County Tech. That's what the FT on his shirt stands for, and does a terrific job there. And I'll send you a question, but I would like to make a comment. Rick has done an amazing job with expanding programs, including animal science, which falls into the agriculture, but also aviation. And there are very few schools that have gone in that direction. So my tip of the hat to you, Rick, on that. But now I have your question. According to Fred, back in 1905, the Governor's Commission on Industrial Education established foundational principles of Voc-Tech Ed, including defining its chief aim. And I'll quote, "Fit the individual for a productive role and job." Could you talk about how your school in Franklin County continues to live out that goal?
Yeah, sure. We saw the need to make sure that our students, as all vocational technical schools and agricultural students, to get themselves out on paid co-op so that it could align with the purpose of why they're here to begin with. So we had to hire a full-time co-op director. We established coursework within the curriculum called career enhancement, where the kids have an opportunity to not only create job fairs, attend job fairs, but learn the soft skills associated with those valuable skills, and then go on live interviews in front of a whole group and in front of a whole panel. So I think that's been the cornerstone of what we were looking at. If I could just quickly share my screen, I'll kind of show you kind of where we've been trending over the last 3 years. But that I would need the host to be able to allow that to happen. But if not a big deal.
Rick, you can go ahead.
Yep. As far as what we're looking at from data that was sent to us regarding how we've been trending in co-op and job placements for students over that time frame, over the last 3 years, you can see that we've kind of trended at a very high rate. And I think that I attribute a lot of that to really having a tunnel vision approach to that over the last, I would say 4 or 5 years. And I think that's been helpful to support our major mission, because we are we're not much different than the communities around us, Jim Bronson's and Eric Duda's and so forth, where our families out here are really economically challenged and very rural, where in the majority of our cases, the kids graduating from our school are the breadwinners of their family. And so without having a strong, to answer your question, Dave, without having a strong segue into real work and work experience, then that dream of vocational education to have these students obtain a livable wage can't be realized. So since then, that's what we all do. I'm not doing anything different than everybody else, but out here in the rural communities, it is a little bit different. You know, gathering from, in my case, 19 member towns and a half a dozen non-member towns covering 550 square miles of territory, it can become challenging getting out, seeing those job sites, making those connections with those employers. So it's a lot of work, a lot of different work out here in the rurals than it is, say, when all the businesses are within a 10 square mile location of your school district.
You know, you make a point there that's very important. And what one of the advantages might be for regional vocational schools is their independence with their own school committee and able to move when things need to be changed in a different direction. We can act quickly. There's far less politics involved. And because you're trying to take care of students across a wide range of communities, you need that flexibility, and we've all been very successful, and that's one big piece of the model that sometimes gets overlooked. Thanks. Jim, back to you now. As Fred notes, the Governor's Commission in 1911 defined that Voc-Tech schools would have basic admissions requirements and regulations to ensure that students were a good fit for their schools and their trade as well. Would you talk about how basic admission requirements have helped serve the educational mission of the Mass Voc-Tech community and made it a national model?
Jim, you're on mute.
If we go back to the premise of why we exist, our mission is to train the workforce to be prepared. When we look at our employers, the number one standard that every employer looks for is dependability. Is the employee going to show up on time, ready to work, and be there every day? Our education is dictated by standards and steps, because when we use the term training, we don't walk in if we have a 20 section set of training skills. We start with one and we sequentially move through making more of those skill comprehensives. What do I mean? If you're a carpenter, you have to learn how to use the tools. You then have to learn how to use the fasteners. You have to learn the system. If you're starting at step one, you need step two, and everything has to follow in sequence. You cannot come in and go out. You have to be there every day. So the model that we work with, because our faculties are from business and industry, is that the premise is that you're there every day. Starting and moving from that is also the ability to benefit the student that is excited, that wants to learn that skill set, that wants that career. At the end of the day, the goal of all schools is to be able to educate and train their students to get a job, to seek employment. In our specific cases vocationally, we are looking at the standards that we need people to be accountable for. In the Higher Education Act of 1965, amended again in 1972, critical to that in the sections dealing with vocational and technical education was the ability not only of students to attend and have the ability to succeed, and I think we've mentioned that in Fred's remarks and others, but also that those students should have the academic background to be able to their mathematics, their English, their history and citizenship skills, so that they're able to participate in society. So what was created for us was a blended skill. The students entering our schools in the 9th grade have demonstrated that they have that ability to attend, that they're coming to school every day, that they're coming punctually, that they're engaged, that they have the academic ability to understand the skills that we have. especially 2024, if all of us on this panel look back 20 years, 30 years, the skill sets have changed dramatically. The standards have increased dramatically, and they are very difficult for students. Automotive alone, we no longer are turning wrenches. We need to know the electronics, the scan tools, the diagnosis. All of that has meant that that student coming in has to have a good, solid academic background, but also has to be here every day to learn the skills. And I think over time, that's where the admission standards came in. Students that wanted to have the ability to benefit from, but also were willing to be there every day to learn. And to my colleague Rick's point, as they mature through our schools, be able to go out in that cooperative educational placement in business and industry to now demonstrate how they can work in that 8-hour, 9-hour, 10-hour workday standard. So I think it's incumbent upon us to say it's rigorous study, but it needs a rigorous attention by our students. And that's what the premise was behind the admission standards.
Perfectly said, Jim. I agree with everything you said. And the world is changing. There's no question that the technology is taking over all occupations in some way. So therefore, lifelong learning is essential. And that doesn't necessarily mean a 4-year college degree, but continuous training and being able to have the academic skills to do that. So therefore, the standards we meet, the MCAS standards, are exactly the same as any other high school. And that's not going to change. But well said, Jim. I appreciate it. Turning back to Jill now. Jill, Fred tells us that early on, Blue Hill's first superintendent-director was a carpentry teacher. Was a carpenter by trade, I'm sorry. And that early school leaders often help define the school's main focus. Would you talk about how Blue Hills trains carpenters and all kinds of construction workers for the region and the state economy?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Ferreira. Here's a quick dive into today's vocational technical schools. We're training carpenters and construction workers to power our regional, area, and state economies. Voc-Tech schools like Blue Hills focus on hands-on training, giving students real-world experiences in carpentry and construction, and through our construction technology program. We start from, you have to learn to crawl before you can walk, so you have to learn about safety first. You have to be able to frame houses, install drywall. The students learn how to side houses, install windows, install skylights, do all sorts of finish work, ensuring that they develop the practical skills that they're going to need on the job. Blue Hills is equipped with industry standard tools and machinery. So students have to become familiar with the latest technology and techniques. It's almost like learning a new language in their trade, and we're making them job ready as soon as they graduate. A key part of Voc-Tech education is collaboration with the local employers. Students often participate in co-op with construction companies. This on-the-job experience is actually invaluable, and it helps us align the curriculum with the industry needs. Voc-Tech students can earn industry-recognized certifications like OSHA, NCCER credentials, and these credentials are highly valued by employers and can lead to better job prospects and higher wages. But it's not just about the technical skills. Voc-Tech schools also emphasize soft skills such as communication, work ethic, teamwork, and problem solving. These skills are now crucial for success in the workplace. The programs are designed to be adaptable, updating their curriculum based on the evolving needs of our local economy. This ensures that graduates are prepared for the types of construction projects that are out in demand, whether it's residential, commercial, or infrastructure. Most vocational schools provide a supportive learning environment, and we have smaller class sizes, which leads to more individualized attention. This can be particularly beneficial for students who might not thrive in a traditional academic setting. The impact on the economy is significant. By training our skilled workers, Voc-Tech schools help fill essential roles in the construction industry, supporting regional development and economic growth. And finally, many vocational technical schools offer opportunities for continuing education, allowing workers to keep up with their skills and stay up to date or specialize in new areas. It's a lifelong learning approach that helps workers remain competitive and adapt to new technologies and anything new that's coming out, methods that are in construction technology. And that's just a quick look at how Blue Hills is shaping the future of our carpenters and construction workers, building the foundation for a stronger economy in Massachusetts. Thanks.
Thanks, Jill. You brought up something that's very important, the CTI program, which we've gotten funding for through the state, which allows us now to open programs for adults, as well as providing training for current carpenters, electricians who want to upgrade some of their skills. And this is a whole arm of Voc-Tech Ed that many people don't even realize exists. So thank you for that lead-in. We're going to go back to Eric. Eric, over the last 20 to 25 years, the Voc-Tech schools are a group of pre-existing schools that use the 1993 Ed Reform Act accountability measures better than any group of schools in the state. Could you talk about how Voc-Tech's used Ed Reform's tools and their student-centric model we use to deliver the excellent results?
David, I think I have a unique perspective on this to some degree. I graduated from Pathfinder Regional, and I'm a product of the 1990s. And when I reflect back, I am now kind of happy that we were able to measure vocational students compared to all the non-vocational students in the state. At the time, I think there was a lot of fear around whether this test was applicable to all, but I think whatever mechanism we use, whether it's MCAS or something else, I think having some sort of a testing opportunity and some sort of an accountability rating that ranks all students in the Commonwealth would probably make sense to some degree. As far as the vocational students and vocational piece, I think it's the perfect example when we're thriving with accountability, when you collectively look at all the regional Voc-Techs in the state. I think it's a perfect example of finding relevance in education and continuously increasing rigor. That's really what it boils down to. We take the academic aptitude of a student, we connect it to a potential career pathway and technical skills, and then we say, okay, how is this going to be relevant? And I think any one of us can thrive in an educational setting continuously when we feel there's relevance in what we're doing. And then you can keep ticking up the level of rigor along the way. And I think we already had the perfect model to be able to do that. And we've expanded upon it over the last 30 years. I've been in education now for 17 years, and I've seen that in my time expand as well, because we are able to continuously take whatever we're working with and connect it to, as everyone likes to call it, the real world. Well, the real world is all around us. So if we can tie everything together and make it relevant for our kids, of course, our ratings are going to increase. So I think it ties in.
Thank you so much, Eric. And Rick, we're going to give you a chance to answer this question, and then we're going to go into a little bit with the remaining time, use a kind of round robin kind of same question to everybody. But your question, Rick, the Voc-Tech schools have a unique mission-driven culture. What are the policies that comprehensive high schools should emulate from the Voc-Tech schools?
That's a great question. When I look at the comprehensive school districts, they are now already trying to emulate what we do. I never thought I would see that as it pertains to, we started off by maybe adding some honors classes, AP and things like that, and we were perceived by many comprehensive school districts as trying to emulate them. But as we're all well aware, in recent years, it is the other way around. They have now are doing everything they can to emulate what we do very well. And so some of the policies that I think that they should have in place is allow us to do what we do very well by establishing more rigorous regulations and policies, allowing for that partnership to not be as a competition, but allowing it to be a mutual training ground for students that they do what they do very well and we do what we do very well, but we all have regional agreements. We all are memberships with these other towns. We're an extension of what they have to offer. So I think, having that be more recognized through either an acknowledgement or some policy would be very, very helpful, because in the end, we're not in competition with them. In the end, we are an extension of what they have to offer. And that's not said enough. And that is, because it's not said enough, it does set up a defensive mechanism between the comprehensive school districts and the Voc-Techs. So I would like to see more of a collaboration policy set forth by the comprehensive school districts, enabling some distinctions on why we do what we do and why they do what they do.
Well said, and very, very true, especially with large regional school districts. We only got a few minutes left, so if you could just give each one of you a chance to answer exactly the same question, just your opinion, and kind of do it as quickly as you can so we don't overrun the time. Starting with, I guess, with Jim again. Finally, drawn from Fred's book and what you've heard this afternoon, Jim, if you were governor or a key legislative leader and asked to enact 3 laws or policies to strengthen Voc-Tech schools in Mass, what would those 3 statewide policies be? Now, I'm going to make it tough on the rest of you, because I'm going to let Jim just give one, and then I'm going to bounce around because Jim could recite them very well himself. Jim, go ahead.
Thank you. And everybody else gets a chance to think about what their answer is going to be. I'm going to talk about expansion, millions and tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars to expand the opportunity. I think we have to look at our communities together. We have to faithfully review this. I think everybody knows on the outside, we need to grow and some of the others need to shrink in a sense, because our population has certainly changed in the 60s and 70s. But that would be invest in the expansion of quality vocational education.
Perfectly said. I'm sure everybody wanted to use that one, but Jill, that one's out. What do you think?
I think we have to talk about policies. I think it's crucial for Voc-Tech leaders to think about curriculum modernization. And we need to stay up to date and adapt curriculums to include emerging technologies and industries that we don't even know about yet or that are up and coming, to ensure that our students are prepared for the future so that when they graduate 4 years later, they can go out and get a job. And this isn't just about keeping up with the latest gadgets. It means aligning with the state and national education standards so that our students' skills are recognized everywhere.
Very well said. And that kind of goes back to the idea of credentials and industry recognized credentials. Okay, Eric, more pressure on you now, buddy. Your turn.
Yeah, I think the one I'm going to go with is access, expanding access. And what I mean by that in this context is I think we need to make sure that we're making it known to all in the 9 to 12 regional Voc-Tech model. We need to make it known to all 7th and 8th graders and even younger children in the Commonwealth that this is an option for them in the state. And I think that will help align those that might have a pathway where this aligns to it. So we need to make sure we have open access. And I would love to see a legislative movement that required that all regional Voc-Tech schools had equal access to all 8th graders and could communicate what's available to them so we could help them early on with a potential pathway in life.
I don't think there's anyone in MAVA who wouldn't push for that the opportunity should be available to every child. And Rick, you got the toughest one, the last one.
I would have to say, if you look at Fred Savoie's book, there's a continuous theme around professional development for these vocational instructors, and there needs to be a strong emphasis for that. We're beginning to make some strides, but we are trying to take industry professionals and have them learn to apply those skills to children or to young adults who have autopsy behavior, have ADD, have learning disabilities, and they're not adults yet. And that's a very hard component to get over for many of our Voc-Tech instructors. So I think having a continuous professional development plan that is consistent among all vocational schools to obtain those credentials, but having more of a mentorship with the professional development so that these instructors are not feeling so isolated and just, here I am being thrown to the wolf to teach electrical, and I know everything about electrical, but I don't know about peer grouping and peer editing and getting these kids to work together. And, how do I do all that? Aside from grading and testing and benchmark assessments, it's a challenge. So something along that line.
4 great ideas, I think, and something we in MAVA can work together with the state to try to be able to get these things accomplished. Jamie, I'll turn it back to you for some closing comments.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Thank you to all the panelists, but especially I want to thank Fred Savoie. It's really both a pleasure always to work with him, but I think we all should feel indebted for his work here. This book is really a remarkable accomplishment. I'm a big book guy, and this is a big book. And I know it takes years and years to both research and write it. And Pioneer has also produced its own book, but it's a kind of great companion volume to this larger, enormous amount of effort that Fred has put into it. And I want to thank our not only the participants, but also our viewers. There's a lot of purchases on your time these days, especially during the summer. And we're really grateful for your interest in the topic. We're going to obviously continue to do more work on it. It's a real pleasure to work with the folks around these schools and around MAVA. They're real pros. They know what they're doing. They're really deliver great results. And with that, in addition to recommending that people Google and find Fred's book, and it's available through his consultancy. We will have an email that will follow that will both share the video, but also where you can get the book. And with that, I'll turn it over to Caitlin Marple from Pioneer. She has a few announcements to wrap it up. Thank you again.
Thanks, Jamie, and thank you, David and Fred, and all of our esteemed panelists, Jim, Eric, Jill, and Rick. On behalf of everyone who tuned in today, I want to express my appreciation for all of your insightful commentary and, talking about how our Voc-Tech schools have really become that model for the nation. We appreciate your recommendations, and we admire the strengths that each of your schools have brought to our educational community. We thank you for your insights as educators, administrators, and leaders. For those of you watching who are interested, the Institute is pleased to host a number of upcoming events, including a briefing on AI in the legal sector with President of Pioneer Public Interest Law Center, Frank Bailey, on Tuesday, July 23rd, and a networking hour for our young professionals at Sip Cafe on Thursday, August 15th. So for more information or to sign up for one of our upcoming events, please shoot me an email. I can be reached at cmarple@pioneerinstitute.org. And again, thank you all so much for joining us.